Hello, my name's Lesley Atherton, and this is a short piece of writing called Santa Claus the Prime Minister. Everyone who saw the new-look Santa would have immediately noticed just how much he had changed from back in the early days of his political career. Nowadays he was calling himself Nicholas Yule and had just booked an appointment at Vidal Sassoon to lose the hippie beard. It seemed that only kids still believed in him and that nobody at all took him seriously anymore. That had to change, he said. He was a force to be reckoned with, he said. Why did nobody else realise this, he asked. No answers were forthcoming. He'd given up the red, fur-trimmed costume some years back, but his career in local, then national government had demanded further compromises. He had to repatriate his reindeer to Lapland in order to satisfy the foreign policy-sensitive people who claimed the reindeer were being denied their traditional lifestyle of being herded and killed for food. He had to lose weight to pacify the healthy eating campaigners who accused him of being an obese, smelly old bloke who was a bad role model for the nation's children. And even worse, he was no longer allowed to spend time with these youngsters. Especially difficult to stomach was that he was no longer allowed to bounce them on his knee for fear of paedophile-related repercussions. Even his elves had been sneaked onto the backbenches at the House of Commons. They now lived under the seating in an attempt to redeploy their obviously transferable skills in the British labour market. It was warm under there and relatively safe, and they at least got a break from their usual toy carpentry work. But the fumes under the backbenches could be quite ripe and fruity at times, too many rich business lunches, and a few of the elves had been hospitalised with extreme methane poisoning. Things weren't working out the way young Nick had hoped when he first considered a career in British politics. Mrs. Claus had slimmed down and moved in with the leader of the opposition. His sleigh had been entirely impractical for city living, and he'd been forced to buy a push-bag. He could no longer chortle his usual ho-ho-ho, it not being considered urban chic or good political capital to show any emotions, particularly inane and cheery ones. But it would all be worth it when he became Prime Minister, when people took him seriously and when he could hold his head up high. Who really cared that he was different, foreign and odd, or that he could only hold down friendships with elves and young children? Who even cared that he was the boss of the world's biggest toy production sweatshops? And who cared that he'd developed an obsession with eggnog and sherry cocktails before breakfast? He was running for Prime Minister. He was a serious candidate, and the voters loved him. Yes, and tomorrow he would be ready to clean up his act, polish his shiny red nose and knuckle down to some serious political campaigning. The shopping malls, schools and department stores would have to do without their grottos. Santa was going to sit in meetings, run the country and become very, very rich. And with that wonderful, joyous thought, Santa filled a snifter glass with Harvey's Bristol cream, sweet, and settled down to dream of ballot boxes. And Mrs. Claus being imprisoned in the Tower of London. Ha, 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 he thought. Nicholas Yule for Prime Minister. Pass us a mince pie.